Good morning, everyone. It's a beautiful rainy day here in Los Angeles, a rare event. We definitely need more of it. It's morning for me. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you're watching this. Today, I want to talk about how there is no world. This is a very unpopular idea. It's something that our ego minds are trained to fight every step of the way because the ego wants to believe it's real. The ego wants to believe it's real. It wants us to believe that the world is real. It wants us to believe all of the fear and the lack and the dominance and all of these types of emotions are real because that's what keeps the ego going. So it wants us to believe that. That's how this dream that we're in keeps going all the time because we believe in it. So what A Course in Miracles is teaching is that there is no world, that the world doesn't exist, and that God doesn't even know about the world. And I'm sure most of you are like, what? Because that sounds like a crazy idea because we're not really taught that anywhere else. There are aspects of that teaching in certain religions, definitely not typical Western religions. But let me explain it to you. So this is what the Course is saying. For me, I found it to make perfect sense and be very logical. All the things that I was studying in spirituality before I understood what the Course was teaching just didn't add up to me. I couldn't understand, you know, if we're saying that God is, you know, that God created this world and that God is in everything, everywhere, and that God has a plan for us, and, you know, just that everything in this world God created and is real, and we just need to sort of surrender to it, it can feel frightening because you're like, well, wait a minute, I really want to love and trust this God, but I'm looking around and I see this God killing people and injuring people and causing suffering, and I'm suffering, and, you know, what kind of God is that? You know, and then of course the teachings say, oh, well, they're just lessons and God is just trying to teach you and so on and so forth. And we go, oh, okay, you know, because that's how our world works, and we have ways of teaching, and we often teach through punishment. But all that can be traced back to the ego. And it just didn't make sense to me. I was like, if it's a loving God that I'm supposed to feel perfectly safe with, then I should feel safe with God and not afraid of God. So when I understood what the Course was saying, it finally made sense to me. The logic kicked in for me. I was like, okay, this doesn't have any holes. This makes sense. So here's what the Course says. It's pretty crazy, so listen up. All right. So what the Course says is, in the beginning, there was just God, okay? And all God is, and you can use any word you want, God, source, divinity, creation, whatever you want. It doesn't matter. It's an energy. It's an energy of love. And so all God was beingness of love and forever extension of love. That's what God is. Just love extending on and on for infinity. And then God decided to create a child, okay? To extend that love even further, to create more of the love extension. And when God created that child, which is us, there's only one of us. When God created that child exactly like God, with all the same powers, all the same abilities. The only difference was that God is the parent and we are the child. That's the only difference. God created us, or God, yes, created us out of its love. That was the only difference. And so there we were with God, happily in what we can now call heaven, what the Course calls heaven. And by the way, as a side note, don't be triggered by all these Christian words in the Course. I was born and raised a Jew. I mean, not very religious. We weren't religious at all. It's more of a cultural Judaism, and those of you who are Jews out there will understand what I'm talking about. So at first, all of these very Christian words in the Course were a little off-putting to me. I didn't really jive with them. It was a little bit of a repellent to me at first. But over time, I understood the words are just symbols. They're just symbols of symbols. They don't mean anything. There is a reason why there's the Christian terminology in the Course. They're really trying to take the Course is trying to reteach you what those words mean, because religion has taught that they mean very different things. That's the purpose of using the Christian terminology. And because so many people in this world are Christian, it was a way to reach the most people. by using that terminology, what the Course feels is correctly. Okay, so that's a side note. So here we are with God in, we can call heaven, you can call it whatever you want, doesn't matter. This state of being, just forever love extension. Here we are in this place, just beingness. And then, as children often do, they get ideas. And the Course terms this as the tiny mad idea. And we, the one child of God, had this idea of, I wonder what it would feel like to be separate from God, independent from God, our own being. And because God created us just like itself, we can create, and we create with our thoughts. We create with our mind. So when we had that thought, whoop, we instantaneously created what we thought was a separation from God, okay? So if this is God, okay, think of it as a sphere. We're inside this sphere, a sphere that forever just extends love. Forever just extending love out, just a beingness. That's all there is, just oneness and beingness. Then that child of God thinks, I wonder what it would like to be separate. And we have that thought, and that, imagine like a bubble coming out of that sphere, a little bubble forms, okay? So now we're out here in this little bubble, okay? God in heaven, where we came from, is here. And then we had just this little thought, right? Like a thought bubble in a cartoon, okay? So imagine it appearing separate. And so here we are inside this thought, thinking like, I wonder what it would be like to be separate. And so here we are in our little bubble. And as soon as we did it, we went, what did we just do? We thought that we separated from God, because our thoughts are powerful. Our thoughts create just like God's thoughts. So when we did that, and now we're in this other bubble, this little thinking bubble, this idea up here that appears to be separate from God, now consciousness is born. There was no such thing as consciousness before that, because there was just beingness. There was nothing to be conscious of. It was just oneness. Now there appears to be this little separation. Now there's something to be conscious of. So in that moment, we have duality, we have consciousness, and the ego is born. It's born inside this little thought bubble, okay? And once ego is born, we now can hear the ego voice. So here we are, the child of God, trapped inside this thought bubble, thinking that we separated from God. And now we're panicking. So what the Course teaches us is that the ego always speaks first and loudest, and that spirit is quiet and just waits with open, loving arms for us to come into it. So when we're trapped in this little thought bubble up here and we're freaking out, oh my God, what did we do? We separated from heaven. We separated from God. We destroyed heaven forever. We're never going to be able to get back. And then the ego voice starts talking to us. Hey, you're in big trouble. You separated from God. And in fact, the ego's so crazy, it told us that we killed God and destroyed heaven and we're screwed. And not only did we kill God, but now God's coming back to get us. I know it makes no sense because the ego makes no sense. So here we are in our little thought bubble, now terrified that we screwed up, we destroyed everything forever, and now vengeance is coming to get us, right? We're terrified, fucking terrified. And the ego says, don't worry, I've got somewhere for you to hide. Come, follow me. Because remember, ego speaks first and loudest. So we're so panicked, our thought mind at this point, that we're not hearing spirit. We're not realizing that nothing actually happened and we're really safe at home with God. We don't know that because we're trapped in this little thought bubble that we created. And since we're so powerful, just like God, we thought it was real. So ego says, come with me. I've got a place for you to hide where it's safe. And then boom, the Big Bang happens and the universe of form is created via the ego, okay? It's not real. It didn't come from the reality of God, of what's here, of true spirit, of the only thing that's real. It came from this pretend thought bubble of separation, okay? So Big Bang happens, the universe is created, and it's all happening inside this little, I wonder what it would be like to be separate bubble. But it's not real. What's real is here, God, that's what's real. So what the Course explains is that we're inside this bubble, this thought of form, this idea that consciousness and ego came up with. We're trapped in it. And what we're doing with this bubble is we're playing it out linearly over billions and billions of years. We're just acting out that moment, that thought bubble. We've stretched it out linearly because time and space don't exist. There is no such thing as time. Linear time is just made up. It's a construct that we came up with. So since it's our mind that came up with it, that's how we've chosen to experience this little mistaken thought bubble that we thought that we made. But the real truth is, when we were one with God and had that little thought, I wonder what it would be like to be separate, and then kind of panicked and freaked out and thought we were separated from God, we very quickly remembered what the truth was and went right back into God. And that little thought bubble didn't exist anymore. It was gone like that. And we went right back into God and went, oh, silly us. And then we just stayed with God. And that's where we are all now, right now. Our true spirit is really home with God in that beingness. We are not even here. There's nothing here, okay? It's just an illusion. It's something that our mind came up with in that moment that we panicked and thought that we separated from God. So what the Course teaches us is if we don't focus on this little pretend thought bubble and we focus on the truth and reality of God and where our spirit really is, it will take our mind home. And even though we will continue to appear to be in this dream world for the span of this body's lifetime, we will know, if we understand the teachings of the Course, that that's not really where we are. We only appear to be here in this body in this lifetime, but really we're here. We're home with God. We are one with God and just a beingness of love, of extending love. That is who and what we really, really are. And all of this little dream world here that we came up with, none of it's real. And the whole purpose of being here is to be in this classroom to learn how to go home to this. Because this is what our hearts long for. This is why everybody feels miserable. And by the way, if you're out there thinking, oh, what's wrong with me? I've done all these things to heal and I still feel terrible. I still don't feel good. I still feel separate and I still feel unloved and I still feel unworthy and, all of these things. Guess what? I have a secret for you. Everybody feels that way, at least some of the time. People who have done a lot of work and a lot of healing, even myself, a lot of people who don't know me intimately and just know, bits and pieces of me or just hear me talking about spirituality. Or even if they don't even know I'm spiritual and they just see my regular everyday life, because I understand manifestation and I have manifested a lot of wonderful things in my life, a lot of people think that I am not feeling those things, that I'm just riding high on God's love all the time. And that's not true. I appear to be here in this world just like you, and I'm an ego just like you, and so are all these other spiritual teachers. And a lot of these spiritual teachers don't even know, well, most of them, almost all of them, don't even know what I'm telling you right now. So they're all trapped in this little illusory world thinking they're making sense of it, and they're just going around in circles. Now, I'm not making judgments. We can agree to disagree if you think what I'm saying is crazy, because it sounds crazy, because it's not like anything we've ever been taught, because everything we've always been taught is inside this little illusory bubble. It's not coming from the truth of what God really is. It's trying to make sense of everything from here, from this little bubble, which isn't based in reality. So we're always confused because we're not basing our truth in reality. Okay. So what the Course says and what it's teaching you to do is to choose spirit, that in every moment of every day, every night, every moment, we can choose ego or spirit. You just have two choices all the time, ego or spirit. And you always have another moment to choose again. And the Course is training our minds to continuously choose spirit, to know where your true home is, to not get lost in this little ego illusory bubble world up here, to not think that that's what reality is, and to not try to bring God into the little bubble. That's what we're all trying to do. We keep trying to bring God into our little illusory bubble and make sense of it. That's where we go wrong every time. We have to exit the illusory bubble and go back to source, back to truth. That's what the Course is training us to do. For me, it all made perfect logical sense. There were no holes. I finally understood. And when I started practicing that and learning how to, what the Course calls practice forgiveness, which means simply understanding that this doesn't exist, this isn't real, so just deny it, don't pay attention to it, don't buy into it, and focus on this, focus on the love, know what's real. Build your house on a foundation of rock. This is real. That's simply, in a nutshell, what the Course is training you to do. And the more that you choose that, the more you choose this, God, over and over and over and over again, the happier and more peaceful you feel. I've experienced it for sure in my everyday life, and it absolutely works. All right, what else? I have a list here. Okay, so God isn't even aware of this world. That is a tough one for people to wrap their brains around, because they're like, whoa, wait a minute. Does that mean I'm alone here? You know, God was so important to me, says some people. Some people, you know, God is not important to them, but I highly doubt you're watching this if that's true for you. And if you are watching this and that's true for you, I hope that you're able to understand what God really is. And just the word God can scare a lot of people away because, you know, it's a loaded word. And it can have a lot of attachments that are maybe traumatic for people or harmful for certain people. So call it something else if it makes you happier. Call it source, creation, call it divinity, whatever you want. Okay, so God doesn't even know we're here. This is a good news, okay? It's not bad news, it's good news. The reason it's good news is because if this is reality and this is God, and God only has one thought, which is love. That's it. There are no other thoughts coming from God. It's just an extension of love. If God were suddenly aware of this false little bubble up here, God's attention and focus would be taken away from heaven and the truth of what God's source creation is. And then God would be split. We don't want that, right? I mean, that would never happen. That's not going to happen. But we wouldn't want that. We want God to remain being God. We want source creation to remain being the powerful source creation that it is. It's never going to change anyway. We couldn't change it. I'm just explaining it to you that way so you can understand. We don't want God to come into our little illusory bubble. We don't want that. We want us to go back into God. Okay? So there's a big difference there. Okay, so then, you know, people say, okay, well, if God's not aware of me, then, you know, how do I connect to God? Okay, that's what Holy Spirit is in the Course. That's what they explain. Again, these are just words and terminology. At first, the words Holy Spirit were a little, you know, I won't go so far to say offensive, but it repelled me a little bit because it sounded very Christian. And, you know, it's not my jam. So, but over time, I studied the Course for so long and read it for so long that it lost that sort of religious flavor for me. It probably helped that I didn't grow up as a Christian, but it lost that feeling for me of being attached to religion. And I just started to identify with the symbols of those words, Holy Spirit, just meaning pure spirit coming from God. So what Holy Spirit is, so like I said, pick another name if you don't like that, just call it Spirit. What Holy Spirit is in the Course is the memory of God inside this little illusory bubble, okay? So even though God is not aware of this illusory bubble, because it's not real, it's just a dream, okay? Even though God's not there, the memory of God is there, right? So we created this little illusory bubble. God's still here. God doesn't know anything about this. But we brought a memory of God with us, and it's like a tether that connects us back to this, back to the oneness of heaven, okay? So it's the voice of God within the dream world. That's what Holy Spirit is, the voice of God in the dream world. So we can hear it, we can remember truth, we can leave this dream world and go back into the oneness of spirit. That is how we are connected to God, through that voice for God, the memory of God, okay? So think about it in terms of a child that is having a bad dream, okay? So if there's a child who's sleeping and you enter the room, let's just say it's your child, and you enter the room and you can see them kind of thrashing around in their bed and they're having a nightmare, you're not going to grab that child and go, wake up! wake up, it's just a dream. You're not going to do that because you're going to scare the living shit out of the child, right? That's not kind. That's not loving to just, you know, very quickly wake them up out of the dream. Now, your logical ego mind may think like, oh no, but they're suffering and I want to stop them from suffering right away. But to do it in such a jolting way is not loving. It brings more fear, right? It's not calming. So what would we do with a child who's having a nightmare? We might, you know, rub their head a little bit and whisper quietly in their ear, it's okay, it's okay, it's just a dream. I'm here, it's okay, you're safe, right? You're gonna whisper it, you're gonna say it quietly and softly until that voice eventually enters their consciousness and they start to wake up very gently, and then they see you, a loving face that they trust, and then they feel okay. Well, that's the same type of thing that God is doing with us. Now, remember, God doesn't even know we're here because we're not here. It's a dream. It's an illusion. But this voice for God that we brought with us into this illusory dream world is always whispering in our ear. I'm here. I love you. It's okay. You're safe. Wake up. That's what Holy Spirit is, always whispering in our ear and reminding us that we're safe. This is our real home. We're not really here. It's a dream, often a nightmare. And it's okay because we're really safe here with our parent, with God, with source creation. So that is how we connect to God within this dream world. And that is how we remember to go home. That's what the Course is teaching us. All right, let's see. What else? So our ego, which was born in that moment of thought separation, ego doesn't want to die, right? It's got a life now. It's living in this dream world, okay? And anything that has life in the universe wants to keep living. That's just the way it works. So our ego wants to stay alive. So our ego knows that there is a voice for God who wants to bring us back home. And our ego knows that once we do that and follow that voice, that the ego dies. So it doesn't want us to do that. And it is going to fight tooth and nail for us to stay in this dream world so that it stays alive. It's just what it does. The ego is at best suspicious and at worst vicious, okay? Our ego is not our friend. It is not looking to love us, take care of us. There are a lot of teachings in the spiritual world that tell, oh, your ego's your friend and it's good to have ego for this, that, and the other. And, you know, I'm not going to say that those things aren't true the way that those things are being described, but they're only true within this pretend illusory bubble. They're not true within the real truth of how the world is. Okay. The ego is not our friend. Yes, it's good. Okay. It's hard for me to explain. The way that people try to say that the ego is our friend within the illusory world, they're just using the wrong words. You know, if we have, like me, I didn't necessarily want to start a YouTube channel. I didn't want to be on these videos. I'm an introvert. You know, I didn't want to be like, you know, putting myself out there to the world. But Spirit really came and spoke to me and wanted me to do this, you know, and I'm a spiritual warrior. So I just do whatever Spirit tells me, even if it's embarrassing. And so my point is that through Spirit, I got the courage to do this, even though my ego would not have wanted to do this. My ego would be afraid and wouldn't want to put myself out there and wouldn't want to, you know, make myself vulnerable to possible, you know, hurts and dangers out in the world. I don't like doing that. But so some people might say, oh, well, Brianna's ego helped her, you know, to do this, to create this channel and create these videos. So the ego's a good thing. But it's not really my ego that did that. In fact, it's my ego that would have stopped me from doing this. It's Spirit that is helping me to do this. It's not my ego. So I guess that's the best way for me to explain it, is it's just the concepts are correct, that it's good to, you know, be brave and go out into the world and do things, but that's not Okay, it's not a good thing if it's coming from ego, and it is a good thing if it's coming from spirit. Okay, so for example, there are a lot of people on YouTube or any kind of social media that don't really have a message or a purpose. They just want likes, and they just want views, and they just want to be popular or famous. So that is a case where it's coming from ego. You know, the desire to get out there and put yourself out in the world is coming from an ego place. But if someone is saying, hey, I really have something that I want to give to the world, I have a message I want to spread, or I want to help people in one way or another, whether it be, you know, talking about spirituality like I am, or just a simple how-to, you know, how to upload a video, or, you know, how to clean your car engine or whatever. In those cases, it's coming from spirit because someone has something loving that they want to give and share. So, you know, that's another thing the Course teaches us, is that every single symbol that we see in this illusory world, it can have an ego interpretation and it can have a spirit interpretation. And it's up to us to use our minds to choose the spirit interpretation again and again. Therefore, we are constantly rooting ourselves in the truth of source creation. Okay, it's just a practice. It's just like exercising and building muscles, except the muscle is your mind, which is not the same as your brain, but that's a whole nother conversation. Okay, so I also just want to tag on here real quick that there are a lot of ways that we look at people or civilizations from the past and we spiritualize them and think that they were somehow better or had more knowledge. And, you know, this is true in this illusory world of form that, yeah, you know, a couple hundred years ago, people understood, you know, plants and how to use plant medicine and how to grow their own food and, you know, basically how to live off the land. And many of us have lost that knowledge, you know, in today's modern society. So yes, within this illusory bubble, there can appear to be things that, you know, people once knew that people today don't, and vice versa. There's things today that we know that people back then didn't, but it doesn't matter. It's all illusion. It's nonsense. It doesn't mean anything. So my point in bringing this up is that when we look back at certain civilizations and say, oh, they were so enlightened, or for example, you know, the Mayans, that there's theories out there that they just, you know, they were so enlightened, they just vibrated off the planet. Well, they were practicing human sacrifice. So, no, not enlightened, not vibrating off the planet. And there's things like that that we just choose to ignore and not pay attention to. For me, it just really always comes down to logic. Now, I am a Virgo and I am practical and I do just have a very logical mind, the way I go about things. And that's a big reason why the Course made a lot of sense to me. I feel that it's very logical, that there are no holes. And I see how we over-spiritualize many things that aren't necessarily spiritual. And it's because we keep wanting to bring God into our pretend illusory world here. That's why we keep wanting to do that. And it's not our fault. It's just what our ego mind has trained us to do all these years. So it just takes practice to learn how to not do that. So I'm going to close with, I was reading this morning from Disappearance of the Universe, and I thought these points were interesting and I wanted to share with you. It says, okay, so keep in mind in this book, there are two beings that come to the author, Gary Renard, and speak to him and share knowledge with him. And those two beings explain that they are simply, you know, am I saying that word right? Apparitions? I don't know if I'm saying that word right, but they appeared, you know, kind of like a, not even like a ghost or a spirit or anything. They look like solid bodies, but they appeared in the dream bubble, really coming from here, but like the voice for God coming from Holy Spirit, they appeared in here. It's a long story. Once you understand all of this and you know how to come from here, you can do anything you want, just like Jesus did with the tomb and his body reappearing and everything. And Jesus is not the only one. We all know this. There's many, many humans on this planet who have learned how to do that, how to manipulate the illusion, because even quantum physics has proven there's nothing here. It's all illusion. There's nothing here. The entire universe is made up of almost entirely empty space. And as I described in one of my other videos about atoms, atoms are almost entirely empty space, and everything in the universe is made of atoms. It's logic. It's right there in front of us. Okay, so it says, you'll eventually have to realize that you can't spiritualize anything that is not spirit, which means you can't really spiritualize anything in the universe of form. The truly spiritual is only outside of it. That is where you really belong and will eventually return. Okay? So what that is referring to is that there's no spirit here in this illusory world that we think we're in. This is where spirit is. So this is where we're always aiming to be. And that is the practice. That's what we're doing, is constantly working on choosing this. Now, even though this world is illusory, it's not real. There's nothing here. It's almost entirely empty space. And the little bit that is there, the little protons and neutrons and electrons, are just thought forms, right? They came there from thought. And by the way, look into quantum physics, look into the double slit experiment. You'll see that quantum physics has already proven that atoms only behave the way the observer thinks they're going to behave. Okay, it's all there. Science is there. The world doesn't want us to know this, so it's not common knowledge, but the science has been there for a long time. So our ultimate goal is to exit this dream world. Even though our bodies still appear to be here, our minds are rooted in this world, in truth. And when we do that, we can see reflections, I'll say, of this in the dream world, okay? Anywhere we see love, beauty, nature, things like that, we can focus on symbols. They are symbols in our dream world of this. But at the same time, it's very important to also identify the duality in our little dream world, the duality that's there. Because as much as, you know, we can look at nature and be like, oh, nature, it's so beautiful, it's so wonderful. But in this dream world of form, that's not true. Nature's killing each other all the time. They're vicious. Trees are trying to kill each other. Animals are killing each other. There's all sorts of murder going on all the time in nature, because this is a illusory world of duality, okay? So don't get caught up in sugarcoating everything and trying to act like, don't try to make this spiritual. This is not spiritual. It's also not bad. It's not about looking at the world of form and going, oh, it's shit, it's nothing, there's nothing here. No, it's neutral. It's nothing. There's nothing there. It's neutral. So that's what practicing forgiveness is. It's taking this little dream world we live in, making it neutral, saying, no, there's no one there. It doesn't even exist. Therefore, I forgive everyone, because everyone is innocent, because there's nothing here. Everyone is innocent because really we're here. We're really just one. We are one with source creation, and we are all innocent. And you are innocent. That is truly who you are. You are loved by source creation. You are loved by all of us because we are one. You are loved, deeply, deeply loved. And you are one with source creation. That is your truth. I love you all. Thank you for listening. I've been very hesitant to do the whole like, share, subscribe thing because it's just not my vibe. I'm not here to be some YouTuber or be, you know, popular or whatever. But I am here to spread this message, and that's how YouTube works. The message is not going to reach others unless there are likes and comments and shares and people subscribe. That's, you know, that's what we created with our ego in this illusory world of YouTube. Even though my ego is resistant to saying it because I don't consider myself a salesperson, I don't want to be a salesperson. I don't want to be like, you know, promoting. It's not my vibe. But I'm not going to look at it from the ego point of view. I'm going to look at it from the spirit point of view, which is, this is a message of love. And I want as many people as possible to be able to hear it, that are drawn to it, that are magnetized to it, and that are meant to hear it. And therefore, I will ask you to please like, share, and subscribe. Okay. So that's me. So you can see right now, it's happening right now in real time. I'm battling with my ego, right? You can see I feel uncomfortable. I don't like it. That's all ego stuff. And the part of me that's being brave and is saying it anyway, that's spirit. All right. Bye, guys.